really very pleased to be back here on campus and have this great privilege and honor to give the Jahoda lecture this year. When I think of her work, I first encountered her work here in connection with the critique of the limits to growth. What I remember mostly about it is her commitment to the significant role that individuals play in society, the place of the human being in society. This is particularly important because many of the conceptual frameworks that inform the way public policies are made tend to think of human beings as being exogenous to the economic system or political system. And she consistently, in all her writings, brought back the idea of the needs and wants of individuals. And this resonated very well with me coming from Africa, where these are really the kinds of issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. She was also very concerned with the questions of discrimination, and she defended or argued against all forms of discrimination, whether it was intellectual discrimination or racial discrimination. She always maintained a level of open-mindedness about the future and inclusiveness about the future that most of us from Africa identify with, coming from a continent where most of the time we are discriminated against. Most of the time we are judged on the basis of prejudice rather than the basis of performance. And it's really in that context that I find her work particularly relevant for Africa. She was a very strong supporter of the role of creativity, human creativity in solving problems, especially in the context of social innovations. And it's in this context that I wanted to present this lecture today. I deliberately refer to it as rebooting development, basically borrowing a metaphor from the computing industry to try to capture the importance of knowledge, or the importance of information and knowledge as a driver of economic development. And this takes effort. Obviously, it's not something you just pick up and get done. So I have a much more elaborate way of thinking about what goes into it. Sometimes it crashes, but the idea of persistence is a very critical aspect of the process of economic development. Obviously, these are familiar ideas here at Sussex University. I won't go into it, but I wanted to focus a little bit on something that's almost trivial, which is a large part of my conversation is going to be on the role of optical fibers. And coincidentally, the Nobel Prize for Physics today was awarded to somebody who contributed significantly to the development of this area. Sorry, yesterday was awarded to somebody who contributed significantly to the development of optical fiber. And this is the one small piece of technological advancement that has far-reaching implications for Africa's development, a continent that has been isolated. And because of its isolation, geographical isolation, has hardly benefited from the knowledge that has been accumulated worldwide. And for the first time, the continent is starting to get connected to the rest of the world. And a large part of my presentation today is going to really focus on the implications of that growing connectivity of Africa. And I just want to kind of put this in perspective when we talk about Africa. It's a fairly large place. The country I live in, when people hear that Africa has 53 states or 53 countries, they think, okay, the United States has 50 states, they must be comparative. But actually it's a fairly large place, and most people don't appreciate how huge the continent is. You can fit the US in there, China, Western Europe, India, Argentina, and have sufficient room to sneak in England. This place is really big. And so when I hear people saying I was in Africa and I dug 3 or 4, 5, 10 wells, or I planted 10 acres of corn or maize, I always remind people that this is actually a fairly large place. And therefore, if you have to make a difference in a place this big, you also have to think big. And scale, in this case, this is where scale really matters. And in some of the issues that we're talking about, which touch on infrastructure, you really have to think about the continent as a whole. Otherwise, you can't do pilots. You can't say, I'll just construct this little road over here, and if cars can use it, then I will scale it up. That doesn't actually work. You have to really think on a big scale. So that's what I wanted to just give you that context. Of course, very limited road networks, which makes economic activities very difficult to undertake. If you can't move goods and services and ideas, you can't really grow as an economy. Similarly, very limited power transmission networks, very limited distribution of primary roads. There are a lot more secondary roads, but they're very limited. Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is somewhere around here, is the size of Western Europe, has a road network, paved road network, equivalent to that of Qatar or Virgin Islands. It just gives you the scale, and one of the reasons why it's almost ungovernable because of the poor infrastructure. More recently, we've seen significant changes, especially to the introduction of mobile phones, the spread of mobile phones. And the mobile phones have spread very fast, partly because they are actually their own infrastructure. It's embedded in them. Africans are very attracted to China, largely because of China's commitment to building infrastructure, for better or for worse. That's played a very important role in Africa's choice of friends. The investment in infrastructure is becoming a determinant in diplomatic relations between Africa and the rest of the world, and also between Africa and development institutions. The idea that I wanted to present to you is, I'm crudely referring to this as technological abundance, but I'm interested in the concept of technological diversity, that at any one moment we have a very large pool of scientific and technological knowledge available worldwide, which would enable Africa to solve many of its problems without, in fact, having to reinvent everything. And this knowledge is growing exponentially. There are people who have estimated that technical knowledge can take, if you use patents, citations in literature as indicators, that is doubling almost every 14 months. That has serious policy implications, because it means that many of the problems that the continent faces can actually be solved by having access to existing knowledge without having to recreate it. So the challenge becomes how you adapt that knowledge to local conditions. We also have new sources of knowledge. There are about 880 satellites in space, of which about 50 or 60 are just devoted almost entirely to generating and beaming back to Earth geographic information. This is we have major industries that are emerging at the moment that rely on this capability. Also, we have now the ability to monitor the environment in ways we couldn't in the past because of the existence of a large number of satellites in space. Expanding computing capabilities, this is well known to you, the so-called Juma's law. Associated with that is the shortening of time frames between research and development and deployment of products. That over time, these periods are getting shorter and shorter. Those of us who followed, say, the IT industry, by the time you hear a rumor about a product, in a few months that product is in the marketplace. And this is largely a consequence of the fact that we have a very large pool of knowledge that has accumulated, that's making it possible for engineers to put together products actually fairly